I'm Amanda Leitner, and welcome to Rochester Rising, where we amplify the stories of Rochester entrepreneurs. Welcome to episode 251 of the podcast. Welcome to everyone joining us today, and thank you so much for deciding to spend some time with us today to learn more about small business and the culture of entrepreneurship taking place here in Rochester, Minnesota. We hope that you learned something today from entrepreneurs themselves that can help with your own business journey. We release a podcast at Rochester Rising each Wednesday. You can find the podcast on our website or wherever you like to listen into your podcasts. We are on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're really wherever you like to listen in to podcast. So check us out. In addition to our podcast, we also have tons of articles and videos that we've created over the years telling the stories of both new and very experienced business owners. And you can find all of that content on our website at rochesterrising.org. And you can also find the links to our site in the show notes. Rochester Rising is a part of the larger organization called Collider, which is a Rochester, Minnesota-based nonprofit that activates, connects, and empowers early-stage entrepreneurs in this community. You can learn more about Collider and how our organization can help accelerate and assist your own entrepreneurial journey at collider.mn. And again, the link to Collider is in our show notes as well, so check it out and find some resources that can help you launch or grow your business. Rochester Rising was started in 2016 to tell stories of entrepreneurship taking place here in Rochester, Minnesota, especially stories that otherwise would never have been told. We pride ourselves on taking a lot of time to understand each entrepreneur and what their journey has been like in this community. If you find value in this podcast, if every time you tune in you feel that you really learn something and feel that this is something that has to continue to exist in the community, please consider donating, becoming a supporter of Rochester Rising. We greatly appreciate any support that we get from the community. If you are a frequent listener to this podcast especially, please consider donating so that we can keep telling these stories. You can find a link to our donations in our show notes or a button wherever you're listening in, however that shows up. But if you can, please consider donating to support our storytelling efforts and to continue to provide inspiration for entrepreneurs in this community. So this week on the podcast, we are sharing a conversation that happened on September 24th, critical conversations about mental health and entrepreneurship. On the podcast today, we are joined by TAD Health and the TAD Project founder, Ben Greiner, and also from TAD Health and the TAD Project, Dr. Marissa Alert, who's a clinical psychologist. The TAD Project is a 501c3 nonprofit, and they are socially driven to increase mental health equity by lowering the barriers to accessing professional, social, and individual mental health support. This was a really great conversation about, entrepreneurship, mental health, how entrepreneurs their self-worth is so tightly tied to their business, how to make mental health a priority, how to assess if how you're spending your time matches your priorities and values, techniques and strategies to maintain mental health and find balance. And we also talk about warning signs that may indicate that yourself or someone else is close to a mental health crisis and to know how and when to get help. And we also talk in the end about resources for mental health support. So this is a wonderful conversation today with TAD Health and the TAD Project. So stay tuned and learn some great resources for yourself and others to maintain their mental well-being. Before we launch in today's podcast, we just wanted to acknowledge our sponsor, Clifton Larson Allen, or CLA. The team at CLA would love to get to know you, learn about your vision, and see if they can help. CLA is a full-service CPA firm with over 100 offices nationally, including right here in Rochester. Sure, they do taxes and audits, but they also focus on helping startups refine their vision, build budgets, work with banks and investors, and track and organize their accounting. They are deeply experienced at building the business systems that allow you to focus on what you do best, get product market fit, grow sales, hire talent, and create a thriving enterprise. Contact Todd Churchill at toddchurchill@claconnect.com or give him a call at 507-280-2317. All right, so now let's launch right into the podcast, Critical Conversations about Mental Health and Entrepreneurship with Dr. Marissa Alert and Ben Greiner of the TAD Project.
So hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Sundsbak, and I am the Executive Director here at the Collider Foundation. Welcome to our series. This one focused on mental health and entrepreneurship. Before we begin, I just want to say that, we want to create a safe space for discussion. This is a very sensitive, but we think critical topic that entrepreneurs face. We have two or three panelists here, including myself today, who hopefully we'll learn a lot from. And feel free to ask any questions. Sometimes as we're talking, we're talking about specific subjects, but, what I find very easy is just to drop that question in chat, and then that helps us a lot and creates a record, especially for the Q&A, which will follow at the end. So without further ado, I will let our other two panelists, introduce themselves, and I'll start with Ben.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. It's awesome to be here today and, share and communicate about mental health and entrepreneurship. And my name is Ben Greiner, and I'm the founder of TAD Health and the TAD Project. And I've spent about 3 years in the mental health space, and most recently founded TAD Health. And these are both, mental health focused organizations. And it's great to be here today. And specifically this month is really important to me and sort of my story behind these organizations being National Suicide Prevention Month. So awesome to be here with Jamie and Dr. Alert here. So thanks. Turn it over.
Dr. Alert.
Yeah. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I am Marissa Alert. I've been working closely with Ben for about a year or so on the TAD Project and TAD Health, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I work at Johns Hopkins Healthcare Solutions in a role not a lot of people are used to seeing a psychologist in, and that's in product development. And there I work to create digital solutions for mental health and chronic conditions. So really excited to be here today to chat with you about mental health, entrepreneurship, and the importance of just paying attention to our mental health.
Awesome.
All right. So I'll be serving today also as the moderator. And, as Jamie mentioned, we want to make this interactive. It's a nice, small and intimate group. And so feel free to, put your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. And if something really connects with you or stands out to you, feel free to signal that in one way or another, whether that's a comment in the chat or, raising a hand. But again, we want to make sure that what we present today, you can benefit from, you feel like you're a part of. And so we'll jump right in.
Awesome.
So the way this is going to work, I'm just going to pose a couple questions throughout, primarily to Jamie and Ben. And where necessary, I'll chime in. But, given their backgrounds, which they'll share with you very shortly, we hope that what we share today will resonate with you. And so Ben and Jamie, before we delve into mental health, how to maintain it, and the signs to look out for, to know when something is wrong, could you just start off by sharing a bit about your own journeys as entrepreneurs and also as, Jamie, your situation working with entrepreneurs as well?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start. I just wanted to share with the audience and how my personal experience allowed me to found an organization called the TAD Project, and just wanted to take you into the details of that, and hopefully that story can connect and provide awareness around these situations for individuals. So the story for the organization, the TAD Project, started in college for me. I was actually in a situation where, through communicating with my best friend, about 6 months, leading into a moment of crisis, I'd realized things were happening in his life that were, might have, been really important for me to step up and get him help earlier. But in the sense of what happened and how I founded the organization was we went through a crisis moment together. And every time I tell the story, my heart races to the moment because it was so critical in me and my own awareness of mental health crisis situations. And he texted me out of the blue, with elements of saying he didn't want to live anymore. So in that moment, as a friend and supporting someone through that, I was scrambling and I didn't know how to help him, and I was really far away. So, luckily I went through, I made a decision. I searched Google and I went through the process to call and figure out how to help him. And luckily, was able to bring him to safety in that moment. So again, it's really important for me, myself to understand what mental health was. And I had no inclination of someone getting to that point before. So, I went through that moment with him and, luckily, he's still here today, but it's really important to know that people are experiencing these mental health crisis situations every day. And, through that, I wanted to found an organization that provided education on these moments, and provided people with the tools and resources to help someone in that moment. And that's, the essence of my story. And I, founded the organization for that purpose, to help and evolve the conversation around mental health, and specifically suicide prevention. So it's a big connection. And, hopefully we can bring some more awareness to those situations and figure out how to help and provide some communication tools. So that's a little bit about my story, and I'll turn it back over to Jamie as he works with entrepreneurs every day.
Yeah, so my story is twofold, right? As an entrepreneur, I started my first company in 2016. Wow, I got to remember how old I am. And anybody who's here who goes through that entrepreneurial journey realizes, there's ups and downs, and sometimes there's 20 ups and downs in a day. And I found that, I tied a lot of my self-worth into the company, and everything was about sort of the company, to where I just had this tremendous focus on it. Ultimately, when the company didn't work out, I was left feeling like there was a hole, like a big hole in my life. Like this thing was just gone, and I didn't know what to do. And it really caused me to fall into a pretty deep depression, to the point where, I didn't want to do anything. I literally just sat and didn't want to interact with my family or anything else. Because I just had tied 3 years of my life into just thinking about this thing nonstop. And when it was gone, I didn't know what to do. So, we'll talk more about elements of that here through this discussion, but that's part one as an entrepreneur. Part two is really the work that we do now at the Collider Foundation with entrepreneurs in our community, where we're spending time really one-on-one getting to know entrepreneurs in our community. And once you start to build that trust, it moves beyond the health of the company, and it starts to really delve into the health of the entrepreneur. And we've heard some, I would say, to me, surprising things from entrepreneurs who become very open and want to discuss things. And that's why we feel at Collider that mental health is such a key thing, because a lot of those conversations, when they get to that level, are really focused around mental health. So I'm just happy we can do this today.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you both for sharing. I like what you mentioned, Jamie, about your, when you're in the process of starting a company, you have a lot invested in it financially, emotionally, mentally. And so, to feel like there's a tremendous loss when things don't work out is certainly a common a common reaction to that. And we're going to certainly delve more into some of the qualities of entrepreneurship. But as we do so, I want to ask you guys, are there particular qualities that you feel entrepreneurs possess that set them up to be very successful, but at the same time, if these qualities aren't checked, could they eventually lead to them, not taking the best care of their mental health?
Ben and I are really good on the clicking the mouse at the exact same time. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, no, thank you for asking that question, because, just for me, I can only relate to my personal experience and obviously sharing with others. But, having founded a second organization and jumping into, being a founder full time, things you're constantly pushing and you realize that, there's a mountain to climb as an entrepreneur and starting a company, starting an idea. And at first, no one necessarily knows what you're trying to do, and going through that process, creates this almost identity, because you are the idea and you're carrying that through. So, I think entrepreneurs are driven, but everything, isn't always great. And I think we always sometimes see that, we pitch as everything is always great, and, we're trying to get the idea and move it forward. So I just want to address that as, it may not always be great. And it's so important to connect with others on that same plane. And that's why we're doing this conversation today as well, because so many entrepreneurs are going through the exact same thing. So that would be, my gist of that.
Yeah, I would definitely say, when the work we do here, just interacting with entrepreneurs every day, you say, how are things going? And everybody says, oh, great. Yeah, that's fine. Everything's good. And I always in the back of my mind go, that's BS, right? There's always something, right? There's something going on. There's something that's a challenge. If it was this easy, everybody would do it. So echoing some of the things that Ben was saying, I think I agree with them all. Entrepreneurship, starting a business is really a self-selective process, right? You have to really be driven. You have to have this passion. You have to really get this business off the ground. So it really creates this drive to succeed. And many other times too, just hearing that many people feel, and I did, that I was probably more alone than I actually was. Something that I've learned in helping to build the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Rochester is it takes a community to raise an entrepreneur. That's a term we use a lot. And sometimes entrepreneurs don't see that because they're the ones building what they're building and their heads down and they're doing great stuff. But there could be a point where that becomes almost toxic in a way, to where they're relying on themselves to solve all of their problems and not realizing that there are people around them that love them and want to support them in what they're doing. So, and then going back to, what I said earlier in my introduction, just this idea of really identifying your self-worth around your organization or the vision of what you're doing. And I think, again, that's great. I think you need to do that when you're building a company, but at the same time, you can't let that consume you as well.
Yeah, really great points by the both of you, particularly emphasizing, this highly driven nature. And, that's great because you're going to need that kind of gusto to help things get off the ground, help things to stay afloat. But at the same time, if the focus is entirely on you doing everything and you relying on yourself for everything, in the end, that can be extremely detrimental. And I certainly like to think about it, using the analogy of being on an airplane. And they said, oxygen gets low, you put your mask on first before assisting others. And I always like to think of that because if you are, the heart and soul of your organization and then that fails, then how else, would you expect the rest of your organization to thrive? And so I think, certainly both highlighted some really great aspects that, entrepreneurs possess. But again, I think this is just a reminder to be mindful of how you're approaching things and whether or not, the strategies that you're taking are going to be sustainable in the long run. And so with that being said, why would you say from your own personal experience that it's important to focus on your mental health and actually make it a priority?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm, can specifically relate to this right now in being launching Tad Health about 6 months ago, and us being in product development and fundraising at the same time. And, that's simply not easy. And for any entrepreneur, any product, anything you're trying to bring to market, it's an incredibly intense time. And, you could say that at times I've been strung out and just so much focus and so many hours into something, you kind of don't realize, and then all of a sudden, you're off, or you have a meeting and it doesn't go the way that, you thought, and you start to, look internally. So in my point is that having some sort of self-care monitor has just been, helpful to me is a way to check in with myself. So, whenever that happens, if I can get, time to step away from things is really important. And I have to take that time. Otherwise I'll continue to work. So that's just something that I've found in my experience so far. And I'm sure as things, speed up, they continue to be challenging, but, that's, through the every entrepreneur.
I think for me, in my situation, I have a family, I have a wife, I have 2 kids, and really, if you're always on and you're always thinking about that company and that vision, I think having that family structure around me is what kind of pulls me out of that. I've learned that as my, watched my kids grow up over the last decade. That's been really why I personally think it's important that mental health is a priority, because I've had to learn to build what I call a switch, right? At the end of the day, no matter what, there could be fires burning or whatever, you just have to kind of call it a day. You have to flip that switch. And that switch for me is getting in my car and driving home. It's about a 10, 15 minute drive. And that allows me to sort of put what's happened in the day behind me and come home and with a smile on my face and want to engage with my family. I mean, that's really what kind of balances me. And when I think about, for the work that we do, it's really important that I don't lose sight of what's really important, which is my family. And Dr. Alert mentioned the key term that we use a lot when we're speaking with entrepreneurs, which is, they'll say, you don't understand. I have to build this thing. I have to keep going. And it's funny, being the person on the outside listening to them, it sounds like they're in an abusive relationship with their company. They just can't step away. And one of the key things we say is do you want your company to succeed? And no one's going to say no, right? Yeah, I want it to work. Well, I'm like, how is it going to work if, you have a breakdown or something happens? That's going to endanger the company. And it's usually those conversations when you frame it around, do you want your company to succeed? Because they tie a lot of their worth into the company, that finally you can see the light bulb go on over their head. And they're like, well, no, I actually have to take care of myself physically, mentally. That's going to contribute to, the overall health and benefit of my company as well as myself. And that's, in many times when I've had those conversations with people, that's really what's kind of been the aha moment for them, is kind of referring back to the thing that they're telling me that they care so much about, and saying, well, if you really care about that, you should probably take care of yourself. And then that leads to a much deeper discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. To Ben's point as well. And, also to yours, Jamie, is this idea of having a compass, right? You have to check in with yourself. You have to know and be clear about the direction in which you're heading. Otherwise, it's easy to end up in, that abusive situation where you're not really taking the time out to engage in self-care, as Ben mentioned, or you're not really taking time out to prioritize things that are really important to you. And I like to think about it as like a pie chart, right? People, say like, these are the things that are really important to me. And, when I have people consider like, how much time are you spending on the things that are important to you? That's usually a really nice exercise to see if how you're spending your time matches up with what's important. Sometimes people are like, my family is huge to me. Ensuring that I maintain my social ties, like that's a priority. And then you ask them, well, when was the last time like you hung out with your friends or your family? And they're like, I'll get back to you on that because I'm not really sure. But, it is really important to me. Like, believe me, it is. And so I think, having these points where we're checking in, we're reflecting on, am I living in line with my values? Do my actions actually reflect what's important to me? I think is really, really critical. And, the idea that mental health, something to be tended to, not just a one-time thing, but it's something that should be a central focus, like throughout the entrepreneurship journey, for both, reasons that Jamie and Ben mentioned. But we talked about the importance of mental health, and Ben, you alluded to this when you talked about some of your self-care practices, but would you mind sharing some of the techniques or strategies that you've used to stay afloat, to maintain this balance between work, being an entrepreneur, starting your company, and also having a life?
Yeah, it's very, very true. I mean, Jamie said it, speaking of an entrepreneur, you think about things 24/7. So for me, I've had to, almost physically put my phone in another room. This, may sound, but I think that separation and boundary away from things gives you the space to, connect to other things. And drop into, going for a walk or being present in something else, right? If you're constantly thinking about the company 24/7, which most founders do, that's just a risky path to go down, as things just become, too much. So it's really important, I think, for me to set boundaries, personally, and make time, schedule in time. Sounds, ridiculous to schedule something else, but just the fact of writing it down, allows me to follow through. So.
Yeah, I think for me, the writing is key. I'm one of those people that I swear, like in 50 years, some sort of like, I would say techno archaeologist is going to come through and like, this guy documented a lot in his life. And for me, writing it down and making just a simple list, right? What's most important to you? And then, I've trained for 20 years as a scientist, so I'm very data driven. So, I've gone through cycles, I would say about once a year, where I spend about a month really deeply time tracking what I do. And I basically just use a calendar and then just as a journal, like a separate calendar, and just start saying, I did this. And then actually looking back against that original list that I created and saying, am I in balance here? And many times the answer is no. And, you can't always perfectly plan out everything, right? But many times, you see the trends and what's happening. So that's when I rely on my support system. That's when I rely on my friends, my family, when I had a co-founder, to really kind of understand that this is a request I'm making of them, to be real with me and be honest and be able to pull me back and say, whoa. Here's, you said you wanted this. I'm just, nicely reminding you should follow through with that. So that's been helpful. I think personally, I've found that nothing else helps me more than actual exercise. So I have a regimen now where I get up every morning. I do like just 20 minutes on an exercise bike, but that's my time. That's the time I carve out for myself. Yeah, I get up 20 minutes earlier. I could have slept in, but that really gives me time to focus. And then I would say every other day, following that up with about 10 or 20 minutes of a meditation practice has been fantastic too. Just to start out the day, kind of before the family's up, before the craziness starts in a household, that I'm really just calm and ready to take on the day. And I think that that's been a huge thing for me. Is I think the last thing is just being organized. I try really hard to stay organized and on top of things, so that no matter how crazy the day is, if you can get a couple of those wins that you challenge yourself in the morning to do, you know what? That's okay. You should celebrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of celebrating small wins, especially on a journey that can be such a roller coaster. It may seem like really petty to, someone called you back for something. It's like, that's not a big deal, but the final deal didn't come through, and it's easy to brush those things aside. So I think certainly, keeping the small wins in mind and, appreciating those can certainly go a long way. And I'm not going to get into the science of that, but just to, summarize some of the things that both Jamie and Ben mentioned, the idea of being real with yourself. If you know that you're checking your phone constantly, and if it's there, you're going to do it, being honest and be like, hey, if I need to put this phone in another room, to focus, to have some downtime, like that's what I'm going to do. And, I agree. Like some of these things may seem pretty ridiculous, or for some people, like, don't you have more self-control? No, a lot of us don't. And the reality is that we like to think we have more than we do. And so I think being really clear with our boundaries is not something to be frowned upon, but I look at it as like, yeah, that's a great thing. Like I know what I need to do in order to do what I need to do. And if that means scheduling things, if it means writing things down, if it means putting things in an Excel sheet and tracking data trends, do what you got to do. I think the takeaway message here is that, what will work for one person may not work for you. And so part of this is really discovering, like, what are the things that you enjoy and getting back and making time for those? What are things that get you going? What are things that help you relax? And, for some people like Jamie, meditation is really great, but for others, like that is a source of stress, because the thought of slowing down your mind and not thinking, it could be overwhelming at first. And so I think part of taking care of your mental health is to know what are things that kind of drive you over the edge, and what are some of the things that really, help to create a sense of calm, help you to refocus, to feel re-energized, and honing in on those things. Because there's, I like to think of it too as stress management. When you're managing stress, the tools you're using shouldn't cause you more stress. And I think that's a good thing to consider when you think about, ensuring that you have mental health, is doing things that will allow you to thrive. And so, as we're winding down in this conversation, I appreciate Ben and Jamie sharing, the tools that have been really effective for them. But, at this point, what I want to do is switch gears a little bit to share what are things you should be looking out for. And I'll have Ben start off with this, given his experience in the founding of TAD Health, and his organization's focus on suicide prevention. What are some of the signs that you should be looking out for? And we'll also touch on how to know when to get help, right? So it's great to, hey, these are the signs, but how do I know when I need to get help? We're going to touch on that as well. And also some resources for you guys that you can share, with your team, with your family members, so that they too have a list of support resources if things tend to go downhill. So Ben, would you mind starting us off by sharing, what are some signs and symptoms that you may need help or are in a mental health crisis?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I, this really goes back to the founding idea of the TAD project and bringing mental health education, specifically with crisis situations, to light, and having people, acknowledge it and know what to do, because I didn't know what to do in that moment. And, I can relate back to that experience with my friend, and leading up to that moment. I think I noticed a lot of changes in our conversations. So as a friend, if you know someone well enough, you have these conversations with them, and things are pretty normal, or what you can perceive as normal, and things decided, or began to be really short, negative connotation and everything. And I knew there was things going on in his life that may have been challenging. So again, looking at signs wise would be checking in on those conversations, and, also the, subtle behavior changes, maybe a strong reaction or, anger outbursts, certain things where you kind of are like, whoa, like, even for yourself, is that me or is that, someone I know? So just noticing these things and having that awareness is just critical. And that's what, I didn't really see leading up to the moment. And I really think what I can bring, as far as from a non-clinical perspective, is knowing when these life events are happening for someone. It could be a breakup. It could be, an entrepreneur related, you rent your runways, 2 weeks till you have no more funding. There's certain times where you may need this extra support. And, if you're a friend, reach out, check in with that person, because those things are happening most likely. And then, if you're the individual, that's the time to, share with someone, when the space is right, to, hey, I'm not feeling right. I'm off. I've been experiencing this, and sharing your experience is so huge. So that would be just what I would say. But Dr. Alert, if you want to focus on some of the clinical elements as well.
Yeah, I think, as lay people, we're not expected to know like what the diagnostic criteria are for, mental health conditions. And, I don't want anyone putting that burden on themselves, and if you felt like, you've had a situation where someone was in a crisis and you missed it, like, that's okay, right? This kind of training isn't something that is taught in elementary and middle and high schools, and hopefully that will change. But the idea is that, you don't have to know all the specifics. As Ben mentioned, if you notice like a shift in the person's behavior, their temperament, their mood, they typically react in one way. Perhaps they're really cheerful and upbeat, but then they're snapping, they're a lot more irritable. Those are certainly changes. But if you're thinking about yourself as well, we all have strategies that we turn to when we're feeling stressed or down. I think one important thing to be aware of is if you realize that you're not able to function at the level that you used to. So that could be for a number of reasons, right? But I think that early recognition that, my performance was here and now it's here, that could be a good indication that some major things have changed, and for you to do something. And perhaps you don't know what it is. You just know that you're off, you're feeling crummy, and you can't quite put your finger on it. Like, that's okay as well. I think realizing that you don't have to figure it out alone, getting back to a point that was made earlier, the onus isn't on you, to identify, issues you may be having with your mental health and also solve them. For some people, it might be an easy fix, but for others, professional help might be needed. And so, just to summarize, if you notice a shift in your behavior or another person's behavior that's really drastic, and it's ongoing. So we all have bad days, but if you notice that it's a persistent change in their behavior, their ability to function, or your behavior or ability to function, that's usually a good indication that outside help might be needed. And the level of help that you might need could simply be just talking to a friend or someone that you trust. And then in other cases, that might not suffice. And so professional help, could certainly be needed. And in terms of resources that are out there, I'm going to give Ben a chance to talk about some of those, and I'll certainly chime in.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I was so set on founding and giving people is this, quick and easy way to communicate to someone about what they may be going through. And, specifically at the TAD project, we've created something called, talk, ask, decide. So in the instance of supporting someone else, being able to talk to them in a calm, non-judgmental way is really critical when you open up that conversation. And then ask meaning ask questions and be direct. And obviously setting up a time for that conversation can be critical too in, asking, is this an okay time to talk? I've been noticing things are different. And then deciding how to help is really key in presenting resources to people. I think it's just invaluable for people to know that they have these professional resources available to them 24/7. And as simple as it is, knowing what those are, 911 in the most, emergency related situations, texting 741 as a third party, as a person to, you don't know them on the other line, but it might be really useful to get your thoughts out. And it can be you don't have to be in crisis to reach out there. I've reached out to that, line as well before. So just knowing that those resources are there for you. And then obviously the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is there 24/7 to call. And one of the things that we've created on the TAD project is a crisis button that you can see there, and it's available to you all the time in wanting to connect to those resources. So just know that's available to you all the time, and for a friend, it's there for them too. So that's just what I'll leave with as far as resources.
Yep. And so Bennett, I don't know if you can, but if you mind putting like links perhaps in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely.
For the crisis line, suicide prevention lifeline, and also not 911. You guys know how to dial that. But Jamie, I believe you had a comment earlier before Ben started. Don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah. But you're all making such good points. It's like I keep trying to oh, this is great. I want to add. So again, right now, Collider Foundation is an organization focused on serving the needs of our entrepreneurs. And, we're in a very special niche where we work with a lot of entrepreneurs. But as your company starts to grow, you build more and more employees, a team. And I think it's so important, and you have such an opportunity being someone who starts a company to really create a firm foundation to have those honest discussions about mental health with employees from an early time, to let them know that you value them, not just for their creative work potential, but, you value them as human beings. So I think, being able to have access to tools and being able to communicate those from day one is such a key thing. So I would definitely say, the tools that TAD project has, as well as others, is just, something that you should really be thinking about, because no matter what, if you're starting to grow in your company, I mean, there's still going to be stressors, and it's not just going to be you stressing about it. It's going to be your team, your extended family in your work world, and you want to make sure they're taken care of as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think the opportunity to really set the tone for the company's culture is something that, as founders, you have a lot of say over. And I think, if that hasn't or isn't in place, that's where being a leader, allows you to make changes and to recognize that, if your company needs to pivot in terms of other things that are available to employees to support them, there's certainly the opportunity to do so. One of the other things that I wanted to, address, I see a question here from AJ. Thank you for the question. I'll just jump right in since it's relevant to what we're talking about. How do you show those around you that you are available to be an ally, to talk, or to listen to? And I think, that comes back to Ben's point about, asking and being direct. And, I think that's a really great question, because a lot of times people have this desire and they want to be a source of support, but, they're not really sure what to say or how to say it, and don't want to come off the wrong way. If I can come up to Jimmy and be like, hey, I'm here for you. And Jimmy could be like, what? I'm fine. There's nothing wrong. And I mean, a lot could be wrong, but you're concerned about the reaction, or whether or not, this person is going to, feel as if you're judging them. And so there's certainly a lot riding on that. And what I like to say is, these concerns are totally normal. Mental health is something that's very sensitive. And I think the fact that you're thinking about approaching it carefully and thoughtfully is really important. But what I'd encourage you to do is just to, before things go wrong, it's helpful to say, hey, I know things are great right now, but if there's ever a time where you feel like things are too much, like I'm here to listen to you. I'm here as an ally. I'm here if you need me. Feel free to reach out at any time. You can set the parameters around which that person can reach out. And if someone is actually going through a really tough time, but you're not sure, the same approach can be taken. Words I like to use are notice and see, so that it's like, it's me. I'm noticing this. This is perhaps not you. And to give you a concrete example, hey, Ben, like I noticed that you seemed really stressed out, or versus Ben, you're really stressed out. And Ben's like, no, I'm not. I'm doing great. And so I think using I statements is also really helpful. And if the person is like, you know what, actually, I'm doing pretty good, like, hey, my mistake, it just seemed as if you were having a really tough day, but, if you ever are, I'm here for you. And if someone has also, said to you, like, things are really crappy and you're not sure what to say, I think acknowledging that is fine, and making an observation is usually helpful. So for instance, if Jamie came to me and he's like, things really suck right now. Like we no longer have our funding, that didn't come through. I'm concerned about like my employees and them being able to provide for their family. And you're just like, whoa, that's a lot. It's okay to say, I see that, and I can understand like how much of a burden, you must be carrying right now and how, distressing this might be for you. I don't have all the answers, but I'm here to listen. I'm here if you need someone to talk to, and I'm happy to help you find solutions. And so with being an ally, with offering support, I think it's important to take the burden off of yourself, to have all the answers, to know the right things to say. I think a little goes a long way when people are having a tough time. It may not seem so, but just having and offering, listening ear can really make a huge difference. So thank you for that question. And, one more point that I'd like to make too is when we think about mental health, we usually think about the most severe cases. And so I'm only going to seek help when I've had like a total breakdown, when I can't function, and that's when I'm going to start seeking resources. We never look at it in more of something to be maintained. And so I just encourage you to have that mindset where, maintaining your mental health is an ongoing effort, not necessarily something that you direct your attention to when, all hell breaks loose and things are falling apart around you. So with that being said, Jamie, Ben, any additional thoughts that you have before we turn it over to see if other folks have questions?
I was just listening to what you were saying. I think, when with the perspective of someone who works with a lot of entrepreneurs, there are certain times that should serve as flags in a company or an entrepreneur's journey that I think having that tactic of checking in, that sort of, hey, I'm just here to, in case, you ever want to talk, we could come around fundraising, could come around losing a key, member, maybe a result of a prototype or a study or whatever you're doing for your company is at a critical stage. We kind of, in our organization, file those away. I don't think we ever have it written down in sort of a company life cycle, but just kind of knowing that this entrepreneur, this startup is about to enter a pretty critical phase. So maybe that's when we can come in and just remind people that we're here and we're here for them a little bit more than we typically do. And I think that that's worked out tremendously well to get in many, I would say, 5 or 6 cases, people, again, not before they reach a crisis point, like you were saying, Dr. Alert, but it was more, just letting them talk through some stuff and maybe, getting some help earlier than before something catastrophic happens.
All right. Ben, any final thoughts? If not, we can.
Yeah, no, just echoing everything, you guys both said. And, for me, knowing that you can, support someone through through their mental health journey, and you yourself can manage things in a better way or on a daily basis. And I think my overall message would be not letting us get to that crisis situation, but far before, and just starts with discovering what that means for you.
Thank you so much to Dr. Alert, Ben, and Jamie for this conversation today. We'll place the links in our show notes also to the original YouTube recording of this conversation, and we hope that you learned something here today that can help yourself or others in the future. All right, that's a wrap for our podcast today on Rochester Rising. If you enjoyed the conversation, please make sure that you are subscribed before you leave today. And if you really enjoyed the conversation, we would greatly appreciate if you took a few seconds to rate this podcast so that others could find it and learn more about the culture of entrepreneurship and innovation taking place in this community. We'll be back next week with a new podcast episode.